2012 about reporting in these communities, about pursuing a documentary and trying to tell a accurate and fair journalistic story in that format, and just what it was like filming in these communities. We're very happy to answer any of your questions, don't be shy. So to kick us off, I'm gonna start with a question for Patty. Patty gets the highest chair. So Patty, tell us about the genesis of the story idea.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you all for being here to talk about our film, to watch it. And gosh, I'm old, so I've been reporting on this issue for a long time. And about 25 years ago, I used to host a radio show called Native American Calling, and we traveled to Alaska a number of times to cover what they call the Alaska Federation of Natives, and it's the largest gathering of Alaska Native tribes every year, and they alternate between Fairbanks and Anchorage. And so I started hearing about climate change, and people from the villages were saying how they were noticing differences and how that frightened them. And so we ended up doing a whole hour-long program on this issue, and in the whole process of talking to the elders from the Arctic Circle, they said that they have the right to be cold. And it really hit me. It's like, who says that? You know, the right to be cold. And they said their cultures depend on the cold. They're used to that. That's what they need. That's to have the ice form so they can get out to the deeper parts of the ocean to hunt the seal and walrus and whales, and then all the other fishing that they do. So that's when I really started to look into this issue of climate change as it's impacting Native villages and their cultures, their way of life, which also ties into their religion. And then this opportunity came up to do an investigative film for Frontline, and I thought, what better time than to go back and see what's going on now.
And so this was more than 20 years ago? They've been talking about this for
yes,
way back
and that's
then.
what we found in our reporting too, the GAO reports. So many reports that had recommendations over and over again that talked about how there should be a clearinghouse, there should be some sort of collective effort to help the villages with whether they're going to protect in place for the moment or whether they're going to start the relocation process, and how to make that a little more smoothly. But nothing has happened. After report that's been issued, nothing has happened.
That was an interesting finding that we came across in making the film and doing our reporting, that this wasn't an issue that we had stumbled upon or a recent event, that climate change is now having this profound effect on these communities. These are communities that have been reeling from the disastrous consequences of severe storms and erosion, permafrost thaw, rising sea levels for a long time. And
the warming climate, so that means the sea ice, it's not freezing. So that presents a whole new set of problems.
Okay, so you came up with this idea. How did you get Frontline to get behind it? This is not an easy, for journalists out there, this is not an easy thing to achieve. So tell us what you did.
A lot of fast talking. Well, it's all in the pitch, right? And so they wanted to know what do you know about this? Where do you think you can go? And all of that. And I think I surprised them because I said I wanted to go in the dead of winter. I wanted to go at its coldest to see what does that look like today? Because again, I've been told over and over it's not as cold as when people who are 60 years old today, what it was like when they were teenagers. So that was the first challenge. We're going to go in the winter time, and we had a pre-production trip scheduled, and that turned into a full-blown shooting trip because you just can't get out there and not shoot. So we went prepared with our videographer, our drone operator, and when I first started trying to do research and trying to reach out to villages, you can't go there unless you know somebody who lives there. You cannot just show up. If you do, you're going to die because there are no hotels and there are no restaurants in many of these small villages. We brought in every single thing we ate and our water to drink, snacks, I'm big on snacks. So we had to carry everything in and be self-sufficient because the last thing you want to do is go into a village and become a burden to that village. So all of our clothing, big jackets, sleeping bags that were rated 0 degrees, and in the apartment we stayed in, the windows were all boarded up so that it would keep some of the heat inside. But in the morning we wake up and you could still see our breath. It was so cold. We unzipped our sleeping bags and it made it hard to get dressed, but we got dressed really fast. So that was a challenge. And I want to say too, I really wanted to go out to Tuksuk Bay, Alaska. And the pitch there was that Tuksuk Bay is the place where the whole census count starts for the United States. And this little tiny village, it's a big deal, and they're the first ones to be counted. So I tried to make contact with people there, and I had no luck. I tried to make contact with another village and had no luck. And then finally I was introduced by my friend Belén to her friend Marie, who does sea stories. And Marie goes out to these outlying villages and she teaches the kids there how to shoot stories using their iPhones or whatever smartphone they have and edit their own stories. So one of her students, Brianna, she had a film that, not even 7 minutes long, it's very, very short. But when I saw her film, she had talked with an elder who said when he was a young boy, he could dig 8 inches into the ground and he could hit the ice. That's where the permafrost started. And he said, today I have to dig all the way up to my waist. And I said, I want to go meet this young filmmaker. I want to go out there and talk to this elder and start in Chivak. So that's what got us to Chivak. And of course, then we met, we were put in touch with our guide, Earl Akchak, and he really helped us with all the logistics of what we needed to do to get our crew out there. And I'll tell you this too, if you could fly direct from Anchorage to Chivak, it would be a 2-hour flight. But because Chivak is so remote, there's no direct flights. And the airport will not sustain a large airplane. So we had to fly from Anchorage into Bethel, which was an hour flight, and then from Bethel to take the little plane that you saw us boarding into Chivak. And it took us 2 days because of winter storms. So we lost pretty much a day and a half of shooting, and also to get to know the people in the village. So that was tough.
Yeah. So now this is a question for both of you. So now this is your maiden voyage on a Frontline project for both Belén and for Patty. You've both done documentary work, you've both done broadcast journalism. What's different about making an investigative documentary for Frontline?
There's so many things to say about this. Well, the fact-checking process, the policies, and they have a process for everything. It's very rigorous, high standards, and it was a great experience, very demanding, and I was very happy that I found this place because, now in times of fake news, misinformation, disinformation, to work in a place where they really are trying to be super rigorous and have everything right is a pleasure. It's refreshing. It shouldn't be refreshing, but unfortunately it is. And it was, for me, what I learned was best practices. And it was a pleasure working in this project for Frontline. And well, today I did a fact check of this. So our script, because we were talking about this yesterday, but our script has 18 pages. The fact check script has 55, and there are 151 footnotes. And each footnote has, I just don't remember how many links and things, but it's ridiculous because you can see one Google page document where it says voiceover, Patty Talahongva, and then all the footnotes. So you have to go to the next page to read what's the voiceover. Yes, it's overwhelming to see that document, but well, and it took a while for us to get everything.
And every night we were working on the script. There were so many, I don't even remember how many changes to the script we had, but every day we would make changes, and it was Belén's job to, at the end of the day, make all of those changes in the fact-checking script, and at the top it noted what day and time it was last updated. So everyone knew, okay, this is the latest, greatest, but stand by, tomorrow there's going to be more changes.
Now that Patty's mom is here, I have a question for her because we had to fact check that she was born in Denver, and we did that, but I didn't ask you. Was she born in Denver?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So we got it right.
All right, that was the last one we needed to verify. So.
We had a funny moment with that because I said, well, actually, I have no memory of being born in Denver, so I better ask my mom. So, thanks for being here, Mom.
The pictures in the film
Mm-hmm.
that was taken right outside the hospital. I was being discharged and you're the baby and helping you.
I didn't tell my mother our family photos would be in the film. And then today she said, that really surprised me, and I got emotional. I was like, oh, Mom. But yes, our family was part of the relocation program brought to us by our fine U.S. government. That's facetious.
Well, you had a very personal experience in doing this reporting. You had a lot that resonated with you. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of telling a story that hits close to home, or reporting a story that hits close to home?
Well, the relocation was just one aspect, but I'm Hopi, and we too live off of our land, and we're still practicing our traditional ways with our language, our religion, our people call us farmers, but we're not farmers. That's our religion. Our religion starts in that cornfield and planting those seeds. We're in high desert, and we do not irrigate. The only way our crops get water is through our prayers, and those prayers are answered in the form of rain. So I come from a desert, and I loved being around all the water. Lauren will attest, I couldn't get enough of the water and the rain, and I was outside all the time and touching the water, and she was miserable and cold, and I'm telling her, when are we ever going to be here again, Lauren? Get on the Honda, let's go out to the Bering Sea coast, and let's take some photos.
So I get back to my sleeping bag on the floor.
And she was sinking into the Kotsuri Sound again and again and again.
I don't know why that was. I was the only one falling into, like the water could find me. You know, Alex was out there walking around, no problem, and there was a line that we took out. There were so many lines we took out, but there was a line that when I fell into many times after falling, Alex turned to me and he said, I don't know why you keep falling, I'm heavier than you are. And just a talent I have. But I think the water was finding me too, you know. So we were out there. Belén was on that trip to Kotzebue, and we really, that was a challenge too. And then to be in Alaska in the summertime, that was in May, and it didn't even get semi-dark until 3 in the morning. So she and I were like,
Sunrise was at 1:30. No, sunset at 1:30 and sunrise 4:30. So we had only 3 hours of dark, and it was summer for them, but of course we were freezing, right? I don't know Fahrenheit, but it was 0 degrees in Celsius. So, but it's beautiful. The place is beautiful.
Yes. If you don't mind, I would say something.
Yes. Would you like
Patty.
Yes.
oh, Mom.
Patty is talking about falling into the water. I think that has something to do with our background. We're Hopi, and we come from the corn and water clans. So our clan represents, what would I say, food, water, and all the creatures in the water are relatives. And probably just, the uncles were probably just Patty was Patty by having her fall in the water.
We were just tapping your ankle. Hi, Patty.
They would have to see her. And I told her, when you're in Alaska, be sure to talk to our relatives. Thank you.
And I did. It's very, when you talk about how do we relate, that's very true. I mean, and when we talked to the people of the village there, you know, they didn't allow women on their hunts for reasons referring back to religion and their culture. So we respected that, of course. It's like, well, I'm not going to do anything that would not be accepted by the culture. So the people also look like us.
You know, I think it was pretty incredible to kind of watch your experience of making the film, and everybody, I think, had brought something slightly different to the process of making the film. I, of course, was the one running around with GAO reports going, have you seen this GAO report yet? Does everybody know about Government Accountability Office reports in this newsroom? Student reporters, yeah, they're amazing. They're amazing. Was there anything more you want to say, Patty, about just how this experience resonated for you as somebody who had a personal connection to some of the storytelling and some of the reporting?
Well, that connection to relocation and what does it mean? And I go back to what those elders told me so many years ago, that they have the right to be cold. And they certainly do. So that connected with me, and understanding it's not a simple matter of just saying, gosh, if you're in danger, then just move to Anchorage. That's not the answer. But a lot of them have moved to Anchorage or to other cities because they're concerned about what's going to happen to them the next time the storm hits. And I don't know about you, but I love the kids. I love the high school students, and they were so eloquent. They were so just smart in telling us what they observed and how they were coping. And they talked about their stress. They talked about how, and it's real. I mean, when they see a forecast of a huge storm coming in, they're talking to one another and they're saying, okay, do we have enough oil to make sure we can cook during the storm, or water, or whatever provisions they need, and then getting maybe elders together so they're not isolated. So they're, just like on my reservation, every home has multi-generations, so many similarities. If any of you have done any reporting in Indian country, res dogs are a thing. And let me tell you, in Shivak it was a thing, and Hooper Bay it was a thing, and Kotzebue, there were res dogs everywhere. And sort of like, there was photos of you with res dogs.
Yes, they liked me very much.
Yes.
All right, let's start to open up the room here to questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, Nick, why don't you get started?
Sure. So it sounded like after watching the documentary here, and it was such a terrific experience for one, but it sounded like relocation was being considered as a potential solution. But, and I could be completely wrong on this, but after watching the documentary, it seemed like more of a short-term solution to a longer problem. It sounded like, especially with one of the villages, like they could relocate over the hills that you had pointed out through some of the video, but the effects of climate change are still going to come in. I'm just curious, like, what would the current administration or the Alaskan state government, what would they need to do at this point to avoid the relocation solution?
To avoid it?
Yeah. I think at this point we're past avoiding.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, I think that's one of the real findings of the film, was that there are so many communities now where it's just very clear that they could continue to spend money to try to protect in place or do some managed retreat, but it makes more money sense to pick up and find higher ground somewhere. To be able to do that effectively is to be able to ensure that whatever site you choose is one that will be safer over the coming years. And so that also takes a lot of analysis, data collection to determine, will the water levels rise here to a level that's going to be a problem? Is this going to be a flooding prone area? Is there a permafrost here that could destabilize the community? And then just once you pick that piece of land, once you buy that parcel of land, that just begins a process of like dozens upon dozens of steps that takes years to pull off. There's one village that you saw in the documentary New Talk. It took them more than 20 years after identifying we need to move and we need to do it quickly for them to be able to pull it off. And sadly, in the past few months, we've seen the Trump administration start to pull back a lot of the funding that has already existed, which already we've realized this funding is siloed in different places. These communities have to figure out how to navigate a lot of different kinds of either congressional allocations, grant programs. What qualifications do you need to meet to be eligible for certain grant programs? You have to do them in a certain order. You know, we heard from Agatha, you can't get a house, you can't get a school until you get a house with people in it. And if you don't have a school, why would you have a house with people in it? So just the whole system was just so poorly set up. And then Trump has pulled all the funding away from it as well. So, or is in the process of doing so.
When we were in Vegas, which, who found that ironic that they had a climate change preparedness conference in Vegas? Believe me, they were really selling it, but it was just crazy. Quentin Swanson, who is the chairman of the Shoalwater Bay
Indian tribe.
Is it Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe? Okay. So I keep trying to put creek in there somewhere. Okay. Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe, which is it's in Washington, near the borderline of Oregon as well. And he was explaining some of the issues that his tribe is facing because their land is eroding into the ocean. And so they receive funding, federal funding from HUD to build homes. On the mountainside, they've identified as part of the reservation, so they want to move up to the side of the mountain. And so they were happy to get the grant from HUD. Problem is, there's no road up there. So he had to go through another federal agency to get funding for the road, to build the road, so then they could bring the machines up to start building the houses. Meanwhile, the grant timeline is ticking on the housing funding, and if they don't get the funding for the roads, to build the roads, then they lose the housing funding. And so these grants are competitive in so many different ways. And then he said, since they received HUD funding, they could not get funding from IHS, which is part of Health and Human Services, to build a medical facility up there. Well, they can't move a community unless they have some kind of medical facility. So lots of red tape, lots of bureaucratic, circles that they're going in. And grant opportunities only come up certain times of the year. You gotta write those grants. And let's talk about how small these tribes are. And so in any community, they're not flush with money. So they don't have like natural born grant writers in every single tribe. So they need technical assistance. And that's hard to come by. So some of the tribes try to band together and share that expertise like they're doing in Hooper Bay with Agatha and the native village of Baimute, and then also with Chief Edgar Tall and the native village of Hooper Bay. So yes, there's lots of red tape, and my head was spinning just trying to keep track. We had a line in the film. One of our experts actually misspoke, and he told us there were 93 steps.
94.
94 steps, but then, I should turn it on automatically. Fact check me. There were 94 steps, but then Belén and other people on the fact-checking team actually went through the report and counted them, and there were 80-something.
So there were 3 different sources, and one was 87, the other one was 73, and the other one was 72. So that soundbite was deleted from the script.
So we had to, it didn't matter who the source was, if they were an expert, a scientist, community member, if they said something, we were fact-checking that.
And
with
multiple
sources.
Dozens of steps.
Yes, many steps to relocation. So I want to hear more questions from you guys, and your students and journalists, and faculty, you can ask questions too.
Yes. Oh, hold on. Start it. Yes.
Okay. My name is Madison Knudsen. I'm originally from Anchorage. I grew up there. I'm looking to hopefully go back and do reporting. A lot of what I've seen and what I heard in this is a lot of what's happening, even in Anchorage. Like we had a horrible winter this past winter, like no snow, super hot, and I'm sure that it was like about the same in the villages. What I'd like to know is how do you try to interact with sources? Because I know it's like these communities are very close knit, and especially me being like from Anchorage, as an outside, I'm an outsider to these people. So how do you connect with the sources that you talk to?
Great question.
So we had the introduction through Marie, and she introduced us to Earl. And Earl is a wonderful man in Chivak, and he's part of the search and rescue crew. He is an artist, and he's very outspoken, and he knows his land. He knows where he's from. I wanted him to be on camera so badly. I wanted to tell the story. My original idea was to tell it from a youth perspective, and I was looking for a young girl and a young boy to tell the story. You know, what do they experience, and what have their parents told them? And I thought Earl might be a good bridge between the youth. And so I was talking to Earl about our trip. In journalism, you don't pay for sources. And Earl had a choice of whether or not to be in the film and to tell the story, or to be paid as our guide and basically as our lift, because we rented his snow machines and his sled and his expertise of the land. And he was the one who took us to Hooper Bay, he and Derek. So because of that, he was not in the film, but he's credited as our guide because he just really was very valuable with his knowledge. And we felt very safe going to Hooper Bay with him. And that scene of me in the back of the snow machine, that was in the whiteout conditions. Started out with blue sky, and then halfway to Hooper Bay, the clouds just covered up the sun. It got dark. It was snowing on us. It was freezing cold. And the only thing that saved my hands from not just freezing off were I had handles, I was holding on to, and they were heated. And I kept my hands on those things, and I kept them on high because it was just, my hands were just so cold. Everything else was fine, my knees, my body, my head. We were so bundled up. But so that's how we got into Chivak, and then made our way into Hooper Bay. And then in the same thing in Kotzebue, we made some connections there. And then they were the ones who showed us around. So yes, it is important. You have to consider that. We, in our culture as well, back to something that's similar or familiar, we don't when you visit, you don't just go empty-handed. And I explained that to Frontline, and we had a big discussion. We had a couple of meetings on this. I said, I have to bring something. I just can't come into these villages empty-handed. And especially as a Native person, they're, when you want to prepare your manners. So I knew it couldn't be of something huge value or anything. It turned out to be very expensive because of the cargo. But I proposed that I pick oranges here in Arizona and bring them to the villages, because I know that it's very expensive for their fruits and vegetables. They don't get them out there. They're not fresh and ripe like we are used to here in Phoenix. So I had my friend Max, he picked a whole box of oranges, and I packed them up and I carted them all the way to Chivak and Hooper Bay. And like I said, I think they were the most expensive oranges. But when I gave them out, people were thrilled. The students were thrilled. When we went back months later, they were still talking about the oranges. They had never tasted an orange that fresh and juicy. So, but before I did that, I cleared it with Frontline. But that just allowed me to have that respect from one Native to another, and that's all I brought. It was just, well, actually, I did bring some Hopi tea. That right? I brought some, which we pick wild, and I brought that for some of the elders that I met. So it's you do need to have those sources, and. Because I did the show on radio and it aired on all those local radio stations out there, I had sources there, but I couldn't talk to them because I was doing an investigation and I couldn't talk to them because of Frontline guidelines. So when we were in Kotzebue, we drove to KOTZ radio, and I had Belén take a photo of me outside the radio station, and I felt I really wanted to go in and say hi, but I know I couldn't, so I at least have a photo, which I'm going to send to them now. I'll put the link to the film. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, but just to piggyback off of that, and this is something that we talk about a lot in the Howard Center, what we call them is tour guides. You essentially want to build a relationship with somebody who is an insider in that community. And if they can sort of see and understand what your intentions are and buy into it, they will lend their credibility to you to help you now meet more sources and now be able to have more access to the community. So that's how we were able to build really, and then you're building relationships off of relationships at that point. In the schools, we had really good experiences in the schools. The principals were wonderful. Folks like Earl was an elder in the community. He knew everybody. So once you were good with Earl, you were good with everybody. And so those are the kinds of relationships you try to look out for. You try to sort of figure out what are the dynamics in this community. So who do I need to get on side?
And not just before the trips, but then during the whole process of writing the script. And we asked them, people we met, is it okay to continue calling you and contacting you after? Because in the writing of the script, there were times where we were like, I think we need clarification, or how do you pronounce something? So we called them back, and everyone was just super helpful and really happy that we were out there to tell the story, because we don't see a lot of coverage in the lower 48 on this issue. And it might be some print, but getting out there, boots on the ground, that's difficult. In this whole process and promoting the film, I've done 2 interviews with some Alaska radio stations, and one guy, born and raised in Fairbanks, told me he'd never been to Chivak or Hooper Bay. And so, that shows you the state is large. It's hard to get around. It's expensive to get around. And these small newsrooms don't have those resources. So all the more reason to be very thankful that Frontline gave us this opportunity to go all the way out there.
All right, question over here, Paula.
Yes. At first, I loved it. It was so good. And Patty, your narration, your dulcet tones, it was really well done. Loved it.
Thank you.
I'm fascinated by Hooper Bay, like a town. I was wondering what's its population approximately, and what resources do they have? All I see mostly are the houses. What do they have access to? Medical and stores and things like that.
Well, let's let Belén answer that.
1,400 people.
Exactly.
And that was a tricky one, because all the news articles, they say 1,300. At Chief Toll still, they say no, it's 1,500, and then we end up finding that it was 1,400. Lauren went with Patty to Chivak and Hooper Bay. I went to Kotzebue and Vegas. So.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
But I will tell you, the second time we arrived in Hooper Bay, we became very aware of their medical facilities because we met some travel nurses who are in town.
Wait, let's back up. We were in Hooper Bay for a couple of days.
We were already in Hooper Bay for a couple of days, yes.
Thomas, the young man that you see in the scene, and he's telling us about how the stores have junk, and they don't like junk. Thomas just took my heart. And so he was the young man I had identified about, let's follow Thomas around. Let's get his story. He has lots of knowledge, lots of good information. And when we got back to Hooper Bay in August, we went to Thomas's house and knocked on the door. Actually, I was walking up to the door and he came out. And I was so happy to see him. I'm like, Thomas. And he jumped back and he said, Patty, I have TB.
I have active TB.
Active tuberculosis. And we'd been in the village a couple of days at that point. No one told us there was an outbreak in the village.
Wow.
So it wasn't until we actually evacuated on a little airplane that carries in the mail, and we got out of there, that's another story, on the mail flight, because it was leaving, it was empty, and the other people on there were 2 nurses.
and the travel nurses, and they said, oh yes, there is an outbreak in town right now, and oh, you're probably fine. I don't think you've been exposed for long enough. So.
But if you start coughing up blood in 2 weeks, go to your doctor.
So the hub of the community was the school.
Okay.
That was the school also served as the emergency evacuation facility. So if there is a flood, if there is a severe weather event, and they need to bring people need to evacuate people, that's where they go. They have a backup generator there.
And they did have a medical facility there, a small one, but for major health needs, then we would fly them into either Bethel or to Anchorage. They had local police officers, but no jail. So we were going to talk to one of the young local officers, and we had an interview set up with him, all good to go. And the morning came, the time came, and I sent him a text saying, are you on your way? And he said, I'm sorry, I'm going to the airport. I've got to take somebody who was arrested, and now I'm flying to Bethel. And they hold them in Bethel. So yeah, there's some industry there. Like there's a couple of community stores, I think shoe stores.
The industry. What is the industry?
The industry, not a lot. So you're employed at the school, or with the tribe, or the city, or the medical facility, but nothing beyond that. Another thing that we realized in these outlying villages is they have no fire suppression. So if we had stuck with our original plan to go to Chidak in January, we would have been there in the building that burned to the ground. And that was their village 2-story building. And on the first floor they had a general store, and on the second floor they had an apartment and some offices. And we were going to stay there. And I got an email, because we had changed our schedule, but the man told me, he said in an email, very sorry you can't stay here, our village, our building burned to the ground. So that was shocking to find out there's no infrastructure. Nothing is in the ground, because the ground is permafrost. So everything is above ground. Their sewer system, electricity, you see all the electric poles everywhere, and all the wires that you can see. So nothing is underground. Very few cars. In Chidak, I think we saw 1 or 2 cars.
Yeah, which I think are owned by the tribal government.
And in Newport Bay, about the same.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris had a question.
So I was looking at it, obviously when you do investigations and stories like this, they unlock a lot of other stuff that happens that you could go on. How was it to try to just maintain that track of focusing on the situation with the rising sea and the potential for moving? Obviously when you do stuff on reservations of different reds, you see a lot of things that you could go on. And the second part to that is like, if there is, would there be any other considerations for that to go and report on those other things that are existing there?
There's so much. I mean, we just barely scratched the surface in this film. And yes, we left so many things out. And one of the things that Lauren knows and Belén is like, the decommissioning, what about the decommissioning? Because Newtown moved, and now the people are all gone, but they have to decommission the village, which means they have to take everything that's man-made out. So not just the roads, but any pipelines, their gas station, the schools, all the buildings. And then you consider that they have maybe 5 or 6 months out of the year where they can actually physically get a barge into that area to bring in the equipment and the crews. And in the meantime, the elements are still battling the coastline. So your dock is getting ripped up. And the elements are battling the airport landing strip. So that's not being maintained. So how long will it take to decommission Newtown, and at what kind of expense?
So that was probably, I think, one of the biggest challenges for this film. It was, I think we were less sort of pulled in directions outside of the climate change lens, but there was so much to say just on this topic that we had to make some tough decisions on what to include and what would just remain on the cutting room floor. So you guys have heard the expression, you're murdered darlings? It's a terrible expression in reporting. But there were some murder darlings, and one of those murder darlings was the decommissioning of New Talk.
Lauren said, Patty, that's your murder darling.
Yes, your murder darling.
Yeah.
Everybody gets one. Lula.
Yeah, something I found really impactful was actually like the absence of getting comment from anyone in government, like the sort of view, like calling these people and being sent to voicemails. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the lengths you went to try and get comment, and then the decision to keep that in the film. Because even though it's only like 20 seconds, there's really nothing.
It's a great question.
How long did it take you to get that information or interview set to even get somebody to contact you from Denali?
Well, for instance, we wanted to have a background video call with someone from the Denali Commission to get a better understanding, and it took me a month to finally get a response. And we had that call, and it was very helpful. And then we said, well, now we need an on-camera interview. So I started talking to this woman again, and we set this up. We went this January to Anchorage to interview her and other experts, and to interview Agatha for the last time. And the day before of the interview, January 28th,
She was already in Anchorage, realized.
Yes, and she said, no, sorry, I can't talk to you. It's one line. And I insisted, and she didn't say anything, and then Patty started calling her. But these things happen. So at that day, and we were there until we were 2 more days there, and we had to find someone else because we needed an official voice. And then we talked to Max Neal from the Alaska Native Health Tribal Consortium. But yes, these things happen, and you have to react very quickly.
And I was contacting the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I started contacting them last year sometime, I don't remember when, but they referred me to DC, and then, sorry, no comment, nothing. And Murkowski's office wasn't getting back to us, and Belén was also chasing down her, and then when we were in Anchorage, we were like, well, let's just go to her office. So we walked in there, and I think they were so surprised.
Yes. And then I got a call, like 10 minutes later, the man that I was stalking and trying to get a hold of finally replied.
They met in DC. So we go into the Anchorage office, and we're like, hey man, we're from Frontline, we've been trying to track down your guy in DC, no one's getting back to us. And they were very, very nice. And the guy said, oh, okay, we'll talk to him. And 10 minutes later, she gets a call. So, but then what happened?
Nothing. That's why she's not there.
Yeah. But Tallulah, you should see the footnote to the line in the script that says, for months we tried to contact officials from the federal government and the state, no one got back to us. That footnote is about 7 pages long.
Yes, and there were others that we tried to contact to get some kind of, like what's going on. The state lawmakers, I was surprised. Some of them are Alaska Native. They didn't even bother to respond. Some of them flat out said, I don't represent rural areas. I'm not the best person. Like, well, it's still legislative issues, right? And then I'm thinking, the governor got back to me and said, no, not available. And I said, well, what about the following week? And what about the week after that? And nothing. Yeah, Mark.
So what do you make of that? I mean, and I'm curious, what about Senator Sullivan? Did you try him?
No, Senator Sullivan and Murkowski. Is Sullivan in our list?
No.
I don't think we reached out to Sullivan. We wanted Murkowski because she's a 20-plus year senator, and she got into office as New Talk was starting their relocation effort.
What do you make of it if you've got all these levels of representatives of the people and nobody's wanting to sort of get out on this issue?
Well, it was interesting because that happened. There were some people who turned us down prior to the Trump administration beginning. And then there were a lot more people who turned us down after the Trump administration. So in the afterwards, I can kind of understand there's a lot of fear in speaking out right now. In fact, I think there's an article.
Murkowski even said the other day, last week, that she's afraid.
Yeah. But for the folks who refused to speak to us before the Trump administration, when Biden was still in office, when there were still climate change programs being funded by FEMA and by BIA, still nobody wanted to go on the record on this issue. And why? Yeah, I think that's a great question.
And also we were pursuing Lisa Murkowski because when she got beat a couple of elections ago by the Tea Party candidate, she went back and ran as an independent and credited the Alaska Native vote for getting her back in office. So I figured, well, she's somebody who has a vested interest in this constituency, so she's more likely to talk to us. And turned out not to be true. Dan Sullivan is married to an Alaska Native. Do you know what tribe his wife is from?
She's actually my cousin.
Oh, she's your cousin? I should have asked you, Shundeen.
She's her grandfather, so she's Athabascan.
She's Athabascan? Okay. Yes. So, so, you know, I think what their actions tell us everything. And we can go back to those GAO reports and we can say, in 2009, the GAO was saying all of these recommendations. And what have you done about them?
So first of all, thank you for this, and thank you for all the work that that's put together. It's very important. And on the same note that Paul Mark and the other one, the question I have here: what is the ethical responsibility that the society, we have in order to support this community, those communities that has been disproportionately and affected by climate change, when actually they don't have much, that much to really to get this level that destruction they're experiencing there. So as you mentioned, you try to contact the House representatives and try to. So, but now I think maybe it's in our hands. What can the society ethical, we can do to support those communities, and also what do you think when you are putting this together? What do you think you want the audience that's going to be exploring, watching this film, take home?
Well, I've been reporting on this issue for a long time, and it's scary that nothing has been done. And it's not just the US, but it's a global issue, right? One of the best emails I've received since this aired last night was a woman who, actually not email, it's a social media message. And I'm fact-checking myself in real time. And she said, I watched your film, and then I called Lisa Murkowski. And I thought, wow, if that could happen times a million, then that would be something that would be pleasing to me. So yes, to educate people. I've had people say that they've never seen this part of Alaska. They had no idea the issues that were facing them up there and how severe the problem is. So I think education, and then action. And you don't have to live in Alaska to do something, right? So, and by the way, the experts we interviewed, which includes a scientist from NASA's JPL, told us that there are cities in California, coastal cities, also in Louisiana and in Florida, and their coastlines are eroding, their beaches are eroding, and they're backfilling those beaches because the tourists come and expect to see a beach, and so the city has to give them a beach. That's an investigative piece that a student could really take their, put their hands on and go look into that. Because if you go into the city budget, where are they hiding the backfilled land, the sand? What do they put it under? Because the city's got to pay for that, right? So how much are cities spending every year to make sure their beach doesn't get washed away? So
I actually think, speaking of GAO reports, there was the GAO, Government Accountability Office, puts out like a high-risk series of reports, and one of the big high-risk areas that they have been looking at, I don't know if that will continue, but is the tremendous burden disaster relief puts on the federal government. A smart way to handle that would be investing in more climate resilience projects to get ahead of those kinds of expenditures that you have to deal with after a problem. You know, not even talking about the trauma that families and communities go through. You know, not even counting that, just talking about the money. It's bad. It makes no money sense, right? But to go back to your first question about what is this sort of society's responsibility here, one of the things that we weren't able to learn through this reporting is that there are a number of service providers and community groups that are working with these communities to try to empower them to be able to find ways to be resilient, to empower the young people in the community to kind of understand these issues, to take on whatever kinds of projects that they can develop sort of internally and to pursue them. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening at a grassroots level. So that's the good news. Just needs to be more energy around that, you know, dealing with this issue from the government. Thank you. Matthew.
Really love the film. So thank you all so much for taking the time to come out here and chat with us. I was wondering what, if anything, you would change, whether that be in the writing process or the production process, if you could go back and change one thing.
That's a good one.
You don't want me to start talking.
I know what I would do.
What?
I would have more money to spend more time in the villages to develop more intimate relationships with these families, and especially spend time with the kids. Because the very little time that we spent with the kids was some of the most profound interactions I had. These kids are incredibly thoughtful about these issues. We were talking to 15-year-olds about what they are worried about when they have to take care of their grandchildren. What 15-year-old do you know that talks like that? You know, so
yes, I'm going to jump in because there was so many interactions with the students. But I'm going to answer your question this way. I have been telling Lauren and Belén this entire process, this is the first, and this has got to be a series because there's so much. So I keep saying that, and it's out there in the universe now. So this is a series that we started. And we're just going to go around Alaska and then the rest of the lower 48. But the students, there was so much we cut out of that scene because of time, and we wanted to, bring up these other angles. The students told me, I said, do you eat pork, and chicken and beef? That's the diet of the lower 48. And they said, no, if we eat those foods, we're going to get fat. And then they said, if we eat the food in the stores, our teeth are going to fall out. I mean, they're thinking, right? And they don't mind. I kept trying to tell, saying, when they go out and subsistence harvest from the ocean and from the land, the entire family goes out there. And think of it as grocery shopping. The entire family goes out there to get the groceries for the next 6 months to a year. And those cloudberries that grow on the ground, they're picking 5-gallon buckets, several of them, because that has to sustain them for a year.
They're out in the seed source for the next year.
Yeah, that only ripens once a year. All the different greens. There was a really wonderful scene in that Disney movie, which was amazing, that Agatha's daughter shared with us, where you see her mother reaching for that tool. So there's a great scene in there, because the kids told me, with all the other food that they eat, they said, and mouse food, we eat mouse food. I was like, did I hear that right? Mouse food? What do you mean mouse food? And they said, well, mouse food. And it was so funny. In the film from Disney, they have a whole scene about that. And it's a little rodent that lives out there in the tundra, and that rodent collects seeds and nuts, and also little roots that are young, fresh roots. And they pack it into this mound for their winter food storage, right? And if I looked at the landscape, I just see little waves and I can't tell what's real and what's not. They know how to spot a mound and they'll say, oh, there's some mouse food. And then they dig up the ground and they take that little rodent's food stash and they put it in a soup and they make their soup from that, along with their seal oil and their seal meat or whatever. And I just love that idea that, wow, you guys, this is, again, they are living the way their ancestors lived. And so while the students were telling me mouse food, other people told us mouse food, and we're like, we need to put mouse food in this. It didn't make it in.
I would say that we went to Kotzebue in May last year, and after 5 months after, there was this storm that hit that you saw in the ending, and we learned about that because Patty was sending us all these videos from Facebook from the residents. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if only we could just go there, right? We were walking next to that seawall 5 months ago. So it was incredible and shocking to see that. And they have to wait until summer to see the damage because everything is frozen. So they have to wait for more months to see what really happened. So that's something that I would have loved to have the opportunity to go back and see.
Any other questions?
Well, I had one question.
Yes, Chris.
You mentioned back to like the politicians and people that are in these positions of leadership. I've seen that at some point, the investigation I've done where, there's obviously a disconnect between rural communities, urban settings, people within governments. And then you talk to people who are familiar with these key players, and you find that, they generally are gatekeeping a lot of these decisions. They sit on committees and things like that. One person said, in order to understand why they come to these conclusions is to try to look at their belief system. Has there ever encountered anything like people who were say, hey, we were trying to push this stuff, and it just seemed like every time it went to their desk or committee, it just somehow stalled and stuff like that. But I find that very interesting as being part of the story, but you don't want to spend so much time trying to figure out get into their mindset. But I think it is important to always see why. As some people will say here, there's some people lack the political will to do what they're supposed to do.
Well, and that's why we were really trying to push for Lisa Murkowski, and because she's been there for so long. And I think, yes, talking to the people who are doing the work, like Chief Tall, he's so crazy busy and trying to figure out what's the next grant. He told us that they applied for a $15 million grant. They didn't get anywhere near that amount. And so they're looking at grant money to repair houses that are still suffering from Typhoon Merbok that hit in 2022. And now it's 2025 and they still don't have money to fix those houses. And since then, by the way, there have been more storms causing more damage. So it's just stacking up. It's overwhelming, the process that they're fighting and the bureaucratic challenges, the red tape, all of that is absolutely overwhelming. And again, I go back to how, and I think about them every day. I think about the people we met in Sheback, in Hooper Bay, in Kotzebue, and what kind of stress are they under? It's just hard to imagine.
Yeah, that's something we barely touched upon is the stress and the trauma that is a part of just life in these communities because they're really just left to kind of handle all the sort of destruction that can happen from these events on their own.
Yes.
What advice do each of you have for those of us that are in this room that are students and want to create pieces like this that can cause change?
Well, I would say that you have to be passionate about this, persistent, it's not, and you won't have easy rewarding, fast rewarding. You have to keep going and don't lose focus. You open one door and then 100 open, and you need to really remember the story that you want to tell. And the characters are important, and the ability and the empathy. You have to have empathy to connect with them, but truly connect with them, so they can trust you and you can honor their story. So journalism is a wonderful profession that is very sacrificed. So, and we are not doing this for money, right? So, you really have to honor what you have learned, put in practice, and the people and the stories that you are going to tell.
I think you really have to read a lot and open up your world. I've been doing this for a long time, and so learning about different parts of the world. I love to travel, I love reading, and that helps you. And paying attention to not just news in the US, but globally, really understanding what's going on around the world. So, the amount of research we did was tremendous. We kept sending each other reports. Did you see this? Oh my God, did you see that? It was just, bouncing between these two ladies. It was amazing. And I just have to say they're both amazing journalists. And I said on the radio show today, which you'll hear, I said Lauren and Belén are journalists who practice journalism with a capital J. They're period. They're that, and all that and more. Yes. Yes. And so you have to be tenacious in your reporting, and something like this is not going to happen to you tomorrow, or maybe even the next 5 years, or even 10 years of your career. But what you can do is build your credibility and continue to learn how to work with sources, so that when you get to this opportunity, you're able to talk to them and find those sources and recognize a source. I think that's another big hurdle you have to get over. Who can be my source? And then make those calls. But research is huge, improving your abilities as a journalist all the time. Sometimes we have stories that we don't like, but you have to report those stories too and give it all, because if you slack on stories that you don't like, I came from local commercial TV news. I've covered everything. And yes, there are some stories you're like, oh my God, you want me to go do this? Okay. But you give it your best. You give it your all. You don't slack.
That's a good one. My advice is a little bit more directly, direct advice that you're making a documentary, right? What do I need to know to be successful? My advice is go in with a plan, be willing to let everything change, right? So I think there's a misconception that documentary filmmaking is you choose somewhere to start filming and you just keep the camera on and you collect everything you can. I don't think that's a very smart, strategic way to go about making a film. You'll be in the edit room for years trying to find a story in that footage. You go in with a plan, but you also are flexible to the possibility that you might find something once you're there that you weren't expecting to find, you weren't anticipating, or everything that you had planned falls apart. Which I don't think there was a single shoot that we went on where we went in thinking we were doing something, having a plan to meet with specific people and do specific things, and then everything changed when we got there, and we had to think quick on our feet to figure out how are we going to make this week that we've already committed to here work.
Yeah, we won't get into all the ugliness, but there were some ugly moments.
Yeah, and there were some of it was weather related too. Making a film about climate change. When we were there in August, there was a group of people that were in town at the same time as that we were in town.
They at the school.
We were all staying in the school. Somebody's in the math classroom, another person's in the social studies classroom, somebody's upstairs in art. But at one point in the middle of the week, all the other people left town because a storm was, we got a major storm was coming.
And then it turned into 3 storms.
Yes, and everybody was worried, okay, if there's a storm hits, we're not going to be able to get a flight out of town. We could be stuck here for days. Is there enough food? We're sitting here going, oh, this is good for us. we'll stay.
Well, we had a whole team meeting. We had a whole production meeting, and we had to do, let Frontline know this is the situation we're in. It's in a real potentially dangerous situation. Not hurricane force winds, but close to it. A major storm and 3 coming in, that's the forecast. And we have decided as a crew that we're all good with that and we're gonna stay. And we told them we're in the school, that's the evacuation site, so we're in a safe area. So we, as a crew, had that talk and said we're going to stay. And then we called Frontline, got in a big Zoom meeting with a bunch of big wigs, and just said, this is what we're doing, and what do you think? And I said, the storm is part of climate change. This is what we're here to document, so we need to be here. And then they said, okay, as long as everyone has signed off, everyone's good. And then they all said, contact your families. So we did that.
Yeah.
And then we went to the store, and I pulled out the credit card, and I said, this is your last chance to get whatever comfort food you need to last through the storm, that is coming our way. Because, you want to make sure that you feel good. Like, you're like, if you want, like for me, it was Dr. Pepper and corned beef hash. So, and New came out with a whole box of noodles. And I don't know what Rafi had, but what was your comfort food?
There's just certain drinks that I like, vitamin waters.
But I knew that I needed to keep the crew feeling good and safe and secure, because we were about to ride out what we thought was going to be not 1, but not 2, but 3 major storms. And we're right by the Bering Sea. And so we had a plan, like we're gonna set up a couple of cameras, we're gonna do time lapse, we're going to just sit and wait for it. And then
Didn't really hit.
and then nothing happened.
Nothing happened. And it was funny because the people who were in town watching the weather forecast and we were watching,
And they were all from Alaska.
They were from Alaska, but they weren't locals, and they were like, oh, this is too scary, we gotta get out of town. But all the locals were like, we're looking at the weather, we know when a bad storm is coming. This one's not gonna be that bad. You guys will be
Well,
fine.
the ladies at the front office of the school told us, I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, and they were right, they know their land. Any more questions?
Right there.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Hi. I just first want to apologize. I did arrive late, but the part that I did see of the film was amazing. You guys did amazing. My question was, I don't know if this was already mentioned, but is there any charitable organizations or programs that support this kind of thing that we can help with? Because
Well, thank you for asking, because this program is brought to you by viewers like you. Well, so the big answer is, donating to Frontline to continue their work. But if that's, any contribution is appreciated. But the other thing too is that Hooper Bay, they sell T-shirts, and the T-shirts benefit the school, the students and their work, their sporting activities and whatever they're doing, because they're a school and they're going to travel someplace else for a tournament or whatever that may be, or some event for students. And it's costly to travel by air. So simply buy shirts from the school. However, I would check the postage because it can be very expensive mailing from Alaska, and it can take a long time to get to you. But outside of those two, we worked with the Alaska Wildlife Alliance, and then also, I think, just the villages themselves. But I don't know if the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium takes donations.
I don't know, but they're a great organization, and they are connected to other organizations that are working on the ground.
Thank you.
Yes?
I wanted to ask how you remained objective in your reporting. I was able to feel the emotion there, the frustration when you have these storms come in. I really liked all the shots that you guys had, especially of the ice, the colors in the sky, the ice that was invading on the seawall. That was a very cool shot as well. I really enjoyed. But how do you remain objective and just kind of tell their story without involving your own desire to make a difference or make a change?
So again, the fact-checking process, the learning process, what I've learned over the years too, and I've been a producer, so I've been the one, changing the script on the reporter. fix this, fix that, whatever. And so I stayed very open to changes in that script because I was mindful. I could relate to them as one Native person to another, but we wanted to make sure that we were telling a story that talked about climate change, that talked about the loss of culture and language and religion in relationship to climate change, and then the bureaucratic process. So I don't know if I had anything in there in particular that you guys pulled out because
No,
I thought it was too personal.
I think that for the three of us who are we're journalists and we care about journalism, right? I think we really recognize the value, the importance of journalism. Only profession mentioned in the Constitution. Like we have a very important responsibility to bring this story to the public, and we just really believed in that important, profound responsibility, and how important it was that what these people are experiencing isn't something that they just know about, that other people know about it, that the federal government, that the legislators who we should be holding accountable to protect the public, that they know about these stories. And so we were just standing there and just focused on feeding all the res dogs and just doing things hands-on, it would have limited our ability to have real impact, and that's ultimately the goal.
I have a question too. I had a burning question when I was watching this beautiful documentary, so I have to take it off my chest. Not very journalistic question, but I am curious, and it's probably not something that you can fact check, whether the people reflect on the subject of relocation in the traditional storytelling at all. We touched it a little bit, and I remember a moment when the gentleman said that they don't have a word for climate change. I wonder if you got into that area, which is not directly related to what you were doing, but I'm super, super curious. Is there anything that how people talk about relocation, how people perceive it, and whether there is a story behind it, further than 1940s, like past that?
Yes, and I was asking those questions, and we did have a bite from Agatha talking about, actually we used one of them, right? About change is coming, and what her grandparents and ancestors had talked about, that their way of life will be changing, and they have to be ready for that change. And in fact, there was a scene that we did, it made it in the first cut, but that was like, I don't know, 15 cuts ago, I don't know. I pressed Agatha on that because she was saying, well, we just have to change, we just have to adapt, we just, have to do this. And I'd been talking to another person who said it was warming so fast that pretty soon they could grow apple trees in their area, which is crazy to think that. So I pressed her and I said, well, Agatha, are you willing to trade your seal and your walrus and your whale? Are you willing to trade that and raise chickens? And she said, she looked at me and she just, it stunned her. And then she said, no, I'm not ready to raise chickens. And then she started to cry. And then I was like, you just feel so bad. But I pressed her for that, and then I just waited for her to answer. And she really, we had to give her a moment to compose herself. And afterwards she said, I never thought of it to that degree. So while they are willing to make some changes, they don't want to lose that connection to their subsistence way of life. And yes, but the Gayuk, where you see the traditional dancing, that was very powerful to see. And a Hopi, when I saw that, it looked very similar to what we call our kiva, where we have our dances and our teachings that go on in there. And so related to that very closely. And we had to talk about culture, but it took us off into a different path than what we wanted the whole story, because we couldn't duplicate that same conversation in Chivak or in Kotzebue. So, those are the changes that you make. You think, okay, we're going to do this, but then that changes, and so you keep working on your story.
Well, we can continue this conversation at the reception outside. Thank you all. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.